Okay. All right. We are ready to proceed in this matter. Let me start by asking each of the teams whether or not you are ready for trial. Are the plaintiffs, Bermuda Grass, ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. We have a few preliminary matters we would like to go over also.
Okay. We'll address those as soon as we get through my initial proceedings, and then I'll hear from both of the attorneys for any initial issues we need to address. Is Team Bluegrass ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Excuse me, my witness, Carson Durst, played by Daniel Yanez, got kicked. He's currently in the waiting room.
Thank you for letting me know that. I'm wondering if we can get the coordinator to assist with that, because I don't have access to the waiting room. Mr. Arlinghouse, what was your witness's name?
Daniel Yanez playing Carson Durst.
Just a moment. Ms. Arzada, can you hear me? I want to proceed. I don't want to delay this. So I'm going to keep going with my preliminary matters. And, oh, it looks like Mr. Inez has been returned to our room. And I want to encourage both attorneys on either side. If that happens, my understanding is that has been a problem throughout these in the first round as well. Please let me know so we can try and fix that. We may have delays and we'll do the best we can. All right. I want to confirm that no one here is recording. Is that accurate? I guess let me ask the flip. Is anyone here recording?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
All right. At least historically, the Colorado Bar Association has been known to take photographs of the competition during the round. I don't know if they're doing that, but I did want to notify everyone that that is a possibility. I want to remind the teams that no recesses will be allowed with the exception of those granted for health emergency and especially not between the end of the witness examination and the beginning of closing arguments. I want to remind the teams and here that any disputes arising out of this competition must be reported in accordance with the competition rules. The teams will be required to comply with all time requirements considered in individual scoring performances. And at this time, I will swear in the participants here today. We'll start with all the team members. If all the team members would please raise your right hands. All right, team members. Do you promise that the presentation you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
I do.
I do.
Yes, Your Honor.
I do.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you all.
Yes, Your Honor.
Witnesses, you can keep your hands raised. To the witnesses, do you promise that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to your witness statements, that you will not add material facts or opinions which are not contained in the case problem, and that you will follow the rules and procedures of the mock trial competition?
I do.
I do.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
The students may lower their hands. Now I'm going to swear in the scoring panelists. Scoring panelists, if you would please raise your right hands. Do you promise to adjudicate the mock trial competition as fairly and objectively as possible in accordance with the facts, procedures, and rules of the mock trial competition?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. All right, we're ready to proceed. Let me start with the plaintiff's side. Mr. Arlinghouse, did you have any additional matters other than the issue that you raised previously about your colleague getting kicked out of the platform?
Yes, the plaintiff would like to make sure that you, opposing counsel, and the jury has taken notice and is aware of the 2 stipulations found on page 3 of our case materials.
I have reviewed the stipulations. Let me confirm that the scoring panelists have reviewed those as well.
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
And Mr. Arlinghouse, anything else?
Yes. The plaintiff would like to make sure that you, opposing counsel, and the jury and our witnesses have copies of the team rosters.
You know, we don't have those. I think that is just a product of doing this virtually. And so we did do the introductions at the beginning. Let me ask everyone, we'll start with the scoring panelists. Do any of the scoring panelists need any of the names repeated?
No, Your Honor. No, Your Honor.
No.
Team Bluegrass, do any of you all need any names repeated?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. And Team Bermuda Grass, do any of you all need names repeated?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Next issue, Mr. Arlinghouse.
Yes, plaintiff would like to make sure that the jury, opposing counsel, our witnesses, and you have copies of the exhibits.
All right, I can confirm that I have received a copy of all exhibits. Let me confirm with the scoring panel. Does the scoring panel have all exhibits?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Falcon or Mr. Wren? I think we've lost Ms. Falcon.
No, I'm here. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Oh, okay. Have you received the exhibits, Ms. Falcon?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. Mr. Wren, do you have the exhibits?
I think he just got kicked out.
We did lose Mr. Wren. Ms. Arzada, if you can hear me, we need Mr. Wren back if you are able to bring him back in. Oh, we have Mr. Wren. Mr. Wren, have you received a copy of the exhibits?
Yes, I have, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I just got kicked out and had to log back on.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Wren, for rejoining us. Mr. Arlinghouse, your next issue.
Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to make sure that you, the jury, witnesses, and opposing counsel would be allowed to look at their unaltered exhibit notebooks when entering exhibits into evidence in order to speed up the flow of the trial and to avoid the technical difficulties that may come along with screen sharing exhibits.
Ms. Smith, do you have any objection to that?
Not at all, Your Honor. Simply make sure that the same is applied to the defense as well.
I think everyone, it's quite prudent that everyone should be able to use their exhibit notebooks, their paper copies, and refer to those instead of screen sharing. That makes good sense. So that will be allowed for both sides. Next issue, Mr. Arlinghouse.
Yes. Finally, we request that any remaining closing time may be left for rebuttal.
I will grant that to both sides, and I will just ask the attorneys to reassert that at the end, just so that for timekeeping purposes, and so that I'm reminded, and the scoring panelists are reminded of that. All right.
Yes,
Thank
Your
you.
Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Arlinghouse. Ms. Smith, any issues that you'd like to address?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to ask that when speaking to the court, we be permitted to remove our masks.
I am comfortable with that. I take it you all are in the same location. All right. So long as your team is comfortable with that, I am comfortable with that, and you'll be allowed to do that. I should say, I don't know, this hasn't been addressed, but this wasn't an issue that I wanted to raise. Everyone can remain seated for this. Normally there would be standing, and I would require that, but I don't think that makes sense given the circumstances. So, and particularly for the audio, we'll go ahead and allow everyone to stay seated during these proceedings. Next issue, Ms. Smith.
Thank you. You addressed my second issue. My third is the defense would like to ask that we be allowed to address the witnesses Dakota Weirs and Skylar Weirs by their first names to avoid any confusion as to who is being referred to.
Any objection to that, Mr. Arlinghouse?
No objection, Your Honor.
That will be granted. Next issue, Ms. Smith.
The defense would like to ask whether this court prefers speaking objections or non-speaking objections.
I'll allow speaking objections. I think that's helpful for the scoring panelists.
Thank you, Your Honor. That is all.
Okay. All right. At this time, I'll invite the plaintiff to make any opening statement.
Lush's lies ruin lives. This is a case of tragedy, loss, and sorrow. Dakota Weirs is a bright young man whose life was altered by an ingredient in Lush fertilizer. When Dakota Weirs was young, he had many hobbies, one including playing the piano. He was quite good and in fact won a full ride scholarship to Juilliard. He learned when he was young from his grandfather and he loved to play. But when he was 7, his grandfather sadly passed away. So piano was that link between the two. He started lessons after his grandfather passed. And like I said, he improved tremendously. He was very good, but since then he isn't able to play piano anymore. When he was young, he was involved in his school leadership and his community. And he got a job at the age of 14. Since he was only 14, he couldn't operate any heavy machinery. So he spread fertilizer in office buildings, malls, and fields. He worked there for 4 years before getting diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. His life was altered. He can't even do the things that he loved, like sitting at the piano bench. He can't go a day or even an hour or a minute without feeling pain. In this case today, we must prove that the defense manufactured a product that contains Trufo. We will in fact do this. We must also confirm that Mr. Weirs used said product. He will in fact prove this. They must prove that there weren't enough precautions taken to avoid the risk of getting cancer. We will prove this in the testimonies from our witnesses. We must prove that the defendant's negligence is what caused Mr. Weirs' cancer. Same goes for that. And lastly, that the defendant should have expected their product to be used in this way. And in Dakota Weirs' testimony, he will tell you that he used this no differently than any other fertilizer and treated it just the same. The plaintiff witnesses you will hear from today are Mr. Weirs, Carson Durst, and Dr. Casey Rogers. Carson Durst will tell you that he attended a meeting where scientists said specifically that Drufo could cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but that no further action was taken. He worked for Lush for a few years before transferring over to Terra's Greenery. He will also tell you that he recommended that Lush bake Drufo, and that this could avoid any possible carcinogens, but they avoided doing this to save money. Lastly, Dr. Casey Rogers will tell you that Mr. Weirs isn't the only person that he has seen that has developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from Drufo. He will tell you about lymphoma and how it affects the body and how it isn't genetic. And he will show that there weren't enough studies done, so he conducted his own studies, where he found that Drufo over a longer period of time is much more dangerous, similar to that of the exposure of Dakota Weirs. This case is tragic and alters a young man's life forever. Clearly, Lush's lies ruin lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sims. I'll invite the defendant to present opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Opposing counsel, members of the jury, we are presented today with the tragic case of misinformation, in which one Dakota Weirs claims that he developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma as a result of his exposure to Lush Fertilizer Incorporated's product. No one is going to deny that this is a case of tragedy. This young man has lost a great deal as a result of his illness. This being said, it is imperative to adhere to the conclusions of science, not the urgings of sympathy. We are here today, members of the jury, to explore the facts and the science of this case, and it will be made clear to you that neither of these crucial elements align with Dakota Weirs' accusation. This case is crowded with emotionally misleading evidence that the plaintiff will use to their advantage. But I will encourage you, members of the jury, do not be led astray by the tragedy of the matter at hand. Opposing counsel will attempt to convince you that Dakota Weirs' illness is a result of negligence on the part of Lush Fertilizer Incorporated and the people behind it. But this is far from the case. The defense is dedicated to providing you with unbiased facts, all of which will prove that Lush Fertilizer was neither negligent nor irresponsible in the distribution of safety warnings associated with their product. You will see at the end of this case, members of the jury, that not only is there no proof of Lush Fertilizer being carcinogenic, but even if there was, Dakota Weirs would still be responsible for his illness, as he neglected to follow the proper safety precautions provided by his employer while he was using Lush's product. To support the evidence of the defense, you will hear from Blake Doncourt, the CEO of Lush Fertilizer, who is dedicated to sharing the truth about Lush fertilizers and ingredients. You will hear from Skylar Weirs, an experienced journalist with valuable insight into the issue at hand. And finally, you will hear from Dr. Devin Williams, an expert in this field with direct first-hand knowledge of Drufo and its safety, who will provide you with unbiased scientific evidence that Lush Fertilizer is in no way carcinogenic. Members of the jury, science over sympathy, fact over misfortune. What has happened to Mr. Weirs is terrible, but do not allow it to cloud your judgment in this matter. At the end of this case, we will prove that Lush Fertilizer is not responsible for Dakota Weirs' illness. The product does not pose any significant health risks, and even if it did, the irresponsibility still falls onto Mr. Weirs. Do not allow misinformation to be the deciding voice in your decision today. We will implore you to side with truth, facts, and science, and find that Lush Fertilizer is not liable. Thank you. I'm so sorry, Your Honor, you were muted. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. I'm going to invite the plaintiff to present their case in chief now. The plaintiff may call their first witness.
I called Dakota Weirs to testify.
Right. Mr. Weirs, if you would please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead, Ms. Sims.
Mr. Weirs, why are you here today?
I'm here today on behalf of my condition, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which I believe was caused by Lush's fertilizer and how I use Lush's fertilizer in my work.
Mr. Weirs, can you tell the jury about your life before cancer?
Sure. Before cancer, first and foremost, I had no pain within myself. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma was obviously described to me, or it brings itself to me by an immense chronic pain. Before then, I did not have that pain, and I was able to work actively within my community. I held representation within my own school. I helped around my community as well, working in homeless shelters and such, as well as having a job.
Your Honor, objection. Relevance?
Ms. Sims, any response?
Permission to confer with co-counsel.
You may.
Your Honor, this is highly relevant as it pertains to the foundation and how this affects him.
Mr. Cameron, any reply?
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I failed to see how Mr. Weir's hobbies have anything to do with non-Hodgkin lymphoma or Lush fertilizer.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think there's certainly some information that the jury needs to consider regarding the before and the after effects of what has happened here. So that will be overruled. Go ahead, Ms. Sims.
So continuing on, did you have any hobbies?
Yes, like I mentioned before, I was active within my own community, and I held a great hobby and love for playing piano.
How did you gain this love for playing piano?
Well, this started when I was a much younger boy. I had been introduced to piano because of my grandfather. He enjoyed playing piano greatly, and he taught me how to play the piano since before I could even touch the pedals of the piano itself. I sat on his lap as he taught me how to play the simpler songs, and I fell in love in that way.
Could you play well?
I could very well, because of the love I had for it and the practice I've put into it. I've gotten a scholarship from Juilliard, a full ride scholarship, and I was looking to attend and fulfill that until I had been diagnosed with my cancer.
Can you still play the piano?
No, I can't. Just sitting down on the bench of the piano itself brings me immense pain, and just only for a few minutes after I'm sitting there, I can't take it anymore. And I mean, just even as I'm here in this court, sitting down in this chair, presenting my witness statement, I still feel that pain, obviously, and it goes through me, and it reminds me every day of my suffering.
Okay, moving on. You say you were involved in your community. Did you have a job in high school?
I did, yeah. I worked for a landscaping company known as Haven Landscaping over the summer. I worked from there since I was 14, and I worked till the end of high school.
What specifically was your job at Haven Landscaping?
At Haven, I worked as a spreader to spread fertilizers and pesticides and soils around lawns. Since I was too young at the time to handle any of the machinery, I was given that job, and I've worked it ever since I started, since 14.
Mr. Roos, was one of said fertilizers Lush fertilizer?
Yes, I believe one of them was.
Now, what brought your attention back to Lush fertilizer after this time?
Well, after a number of years had passed, I was subsequently diagnosed with my cancer, and I one day came across a news article, or sorry, I came across a news video on television that described how Lush had a leaked amount of Lush emails had described how Lush had lied about the safety of their product, and that it has shown signs, very great signs of being cancer causing, and of the exact cancer that I have, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Mr. Weers, what did you do after seeing this report?
After I saw the report, I immediately called my dad and also called my old boss just to make sure that this was indeed the product we had used, which it was. And yeah.
I would now ask that the court's and opposing counsel's attention be directed to what has been previously marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 1. Mr. Weers, please direct your attention to what has been previously marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 1.
Of course.
Do you recognize this?
I do, yes.
Please explain what this is.
This is the packaging labeling on the back of Luscious Fertilizer. It includes its safety recommendations and its active ingredients within it.
Is it a fair and accurate depiction?
Yes, I believe so.
Your Honor, I move to enter what has been previously marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 1 into evidence.
Mr. Cameron, any objection?
Not at this time, Your Honor.
Exhibit 1 will be received.
Mr. Weers, was there any warning on the packaging?
None pertaining to the cancer I have.
Did Haven Landscaping require you to wear any protective gear?
They had asked me, yes. However, the enforcement was little to none, as well as everybody else that had worked there had not worn any protective gear.
What was your life like after being diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma?
Well, simply put, my life changed for the worse forever. I was no longer able to follow my love and career of piano. I wasn't able to become an active member of my community, and I basically became a patient stuck in my own home, and I couldn't do anything for the rest of my life. It sucks.
Mr. Weers, where do you believe you got your cancer?
I believe that my cancer is based in Lush's own fertilizer and their component.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Ms. Sims, your response?
Your Honor, I was asking about Dakota Wears' opinion, not about a fact.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I think it calls for an expert opinion, and Mr. Weers has not been, there's been no foundation laid for any expertise on that. Please ask your next question, Ms. Sims.
Mr. Weers, are there any other reasons why you think Lush is responsible?
Yes. My own sibling, Skylar, we've been grown up together ever since we were born, obviously, and we've done pretty much everything together besides this job. Skylar couldn't work this job because they had a grass allergy and weren't able to participate, whereas I have, and because of that sort of cycle, I see myself in the position that I am now, and he's doing pretty fine right now.
Is Skylar here today?
Yeah, Skylar is here.
Do you and your sibling agree on your cause of cancer?
No, we do not.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation again. Dakota has no way of knowing really what Skylar believes about the cause of this cancer.
Any response, Ms. Sims?
Permission to confer with co-counsel.
You may.
Due to their familial connection and their similar lifestyles, I believe that Dakota Wears should have knowledge of his brother.
I think given it's his brother, there is likely sufficient foundation there. I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead, Ms. Sims.
I'm so sorry, Your Honor. Might I just mention, Skylar Wears is actually Dakota's sister.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Cameron.
Sorry for the confusion. My next question is, why is Skylar here against you today? Or do you know?
Yeah, Skylar is here because of his work, I guess. He considers himself a journalist because of what he believes he's done or believes he's found. He thinks that my own cancer can't be based in Lush.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Sims. Mr. Cameron?
Thank you, Your Honor. Am I all right to begin with the cross-examination?
Go ahead.
Awesome. Mr. Weirs, it is your belief that your exposure to Drufo, an ingredient in Lush fertilizer, caused you to develop non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you came to this conclusion because of a story you saw on television, yes?
Also because of my sort of life in contact with Drufa, but yeah.
Thank you. That was a yes, correct?
Yes, indeed.
I see. Mr. Weirs, because of your illness, unfortunately, you were able to further your education after high school, correct?
I was not, yeah.
And do you have any scientific or medical education at all?
I do not.
Can you provide any proof based on your own education and experience that Drufo is carcinogenic?
I cannot, as I am not a scientist.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, you were advised to use proper protection while using Lush fertilizer, correct?
Correct.
And you did not.
I did not.
Would you be able to recognize the Lush fertilizer packaging if it was shown to you?
I believe I would.
Could I draw your attention, as well as the attention of the jury and opposing counsel, to what has previously been marked as Exhibit 1 and is now in evidence? Are you there, Mr. Weirs?
I am. Sorry.
Excellent. Would you mind reading what it says under hazards?
Under hazards. Sure. Keep out of reach of children. Caution causes eye irritation. Avoid contact with eyes of clothing. Would you like me to go further?
Just that is just fine. Thank you, Mr. Weirs. And how old were you when you were using Lush fertilizer?
I started when I was 14 and went throughout the rest of high school, so about 4 or 5 years.
Yes, so you used it when you were 14.
Yes.
So you used Lush fertilizer as a minor, even though it advises against this on the packaging.
I did, yes.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect, Ms. Sims?
Yes. Mr. Weirs, what were the warnings on the packaging? Or were there warnings on the packaging?
I believe there were warnings describing...
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Ms. Sims?
No response.
Okay. I'll sustain the objection. Go ahead and ask your next question, Ms. Sims.
Were those warnings regulation?
They were not regulations.
No further questions.
Okay. Mr. Cameron, do you have any recross based on that limited line of questioning?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony today, Mr. Weirs. The plaintiffs may call their next witness.
Could you please tell the jury your name and spell your last for the court record?
D-U-R-S-T.
Mr. Arlinghouse. Sorry, Mr. Arlinghouse, I'm not, let me just swear him in. I'm not sure if that's required for the rules, but it's out of habit. So Mr. Durst, if you wouldn't mind raising your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the information or that the testimony before this court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. I'm sorry, Mr. Arlinghouse. Go ahead.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Durst?
I am the lead product developer for Terrace Greenery.
What is Terrace Greenery?
Terrace Greenery is a developer and manufacturer of fertilizers and lawn enhancement products.
What does your job entail?
My job entails quite a bit of things. Most of what I do right now is hands-on research for all of the fertilizers that Terra manufactures.
Do you have any formal education for your work?
Yes, I have a bachelor's in chemical engineering from ASU. Go Sun Devils.
Besides your work at Terra's Greenery and your education, do you have any other experience?
Yes, I worked at Lush Fertilizer for 3 years in June of 2003 through December of 2006.
What did you do from 2006 onwards?
Basically, once I left Lush, I started working at Terra's, and I've worked there happily ever since.
What was your starting position at Terra's Greenery?
At Terra's, I was just a basic employee doing basic work around the research, but over time at Terra's, I made my way to the lead product developer.
I move that Carson Durst be recognized as an expert in agritech and chemical engineering.
Mr. LaRue, any objection?
Permission to check with co-counsel?
You may.
Your Honor, I'm ready. Objection. Mr. Durst cannot be listed under the mock trial rules as an expert.
May I respond?
You may. Go ahead, Mr. Erlinghaus.
Your Honor, Mr. Durst is plenty qualified to be an expert. He has not only a degree in chemical engineering, but also has 20 years of experience in his field of agritech, and along with that, a managerial position and the knowledge, skills, and training that comes with that.
Has he been designated as a witness by, or as an expert in the program, in the case?
Your Honor, he has not, but under the rules of evidence and this case specifically, witnesses must only require, because of Skylar Ware's knowledge, skills, training, or a degree, and he has all of them.
Okay. I'm going to allow this testimony. I'll be quite frank. I think he meets the requirements of the foundation's been laid under the rules of evidence. We're going a little bit outside of my knowledge of the program rules, but I meets the rules of evidence, and I didn't see anything in the program rules that precludes it. So Mr. Erlinghaus, you may inquire, and I will recognize Mr. Durst as an expert.
Mr. Durst, I want to ask you more about Lush Fertilizer. What was your job at Lush?
At Lush, I as an intern, and as an intern, I would take information from or tests outside of Lush and inside of Lush and put together my lab notebook and submit my lab notebook to the higher ups at the company.
Did you remain an intern your entire employment at Lush?
No, actually, I very quickly became a full-fledged member of the R&D department.
Did you work on any big assignments while working at Lush?
Yes, my biggest assignment was working on a specific chemical, nitrogen phosphorus carbonate. It is a chemical found inside of Drufo, and my job was to make sure that specific chemical was safe or not safe.
Could you describe how you went about testing that chemical safety?
Yeah, so I myself never did the testing, but a research facility from England did testing where they took a sample of roughly 70 to 95 rats and administered nitrogen phosphorus carbonate to their food supplies in progression of 2,400 parts per million. And then over the next coming weeks, the scientists would examine if there were any leukemias or lymphomas inside of the rats.
Is there a report of that study?
Yes, there is. Yes, I would.
At this time, I direct the court and opposing counsel to what has previously been marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 3. Do you recognize this, Mr. Durst?
One moment. We'll open to it. Exhibit 3. Yes, I do.
How do you recognize it?
This is one of the labs done that I submitted in my lab report.
Is it a true and accurate copy?
One moment. Yes, it is.
Who published this study?
The Mattis Bernard Cancer Research Center in company with European Foundation of Oncology and Environmental Sciences.
Are they a reputable source?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, I move that Exhibit 3 be entered into evidence.
Mr. LaRue, any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 3 will be received.
What was the purpose of this study, Mr. Durst?
Like I said, the purpose of this study was to find any potential lymphomas or leukemias inside of rats after administering nitrogen phosphorus carbonate into their food supplies.
And how is this study specifically conducted?
Yeah, so I'll show you. So right here, you can see on the results, what they would do is they would administer the nitrogen phosphorus carbonate to the food supplies. And over time, you can see on this graph that these two lines up here represent the 2,000 and the 400 parts per million. That represents the number of leukemias and lymphomas going up over this period of death in weeks.
What were the results of this study?
The results of the study found that if you have 400 or 2,000 parts per million of nitrogen phosphorus carbonate in your blood, you have twice as likely of a chance of having cancer.
In your expert opinion, can you link the results on rats to any results on humans?
Not particularly, no, but rats and humans are mammals, and so there may be a correlation.
Did you report this study to your higher ups?
Yes, I did.
Did you ever hear from them concerning the conclusions of that study?
Yes, they sent out an email to all the scientists in the group.
Is there a copy of that email?
Yes.
If you saw it, would you recognize it?
Yes, I would.
At this time, I ask that opposing counsel and the court direct their attention to what has previously been marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 4. Do you recognize this, Mr. Durst?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize it?
This is one of the many emails you received from our manager, Gary Langley.
Who is Jerry Langley?
I said he's a manager, one of the higher ups in charge of direct sciences in the R&D labs, Lush.
Is it a true and accurate copy of that email?
Yes, it is.
Objection, Your Honor. I don't see how this email applies to the truth of the matter.
Permission to respond?
Mr. LaRue, is there a rule of evidence that you're thinking of?
No, Your Honor. This is just an email about the administration at Lush.
Mr. Arlinghouse, go ahead, Mr. LaRue.
So it has nothing to do with the case at hand.
Yeah, I think he's objecting to relevance, but Your Honor, I think this is very probative. And Your Honor, I think this is very probative and substantial evidence talking about the inner workings of Lush, how they operate, and Lush being the defendant really goes to kind of show the motives, intents at Lush.
The objection will be overruled. Go ahead, Mr. Arlinghouse.
Your Honor, I move that Exhibit 4 be entered into evidence.
I think Mr. LaRue lodged his objection. I will receive Exhibit 4.
Mr. Durst, when did you receive this email?
Mid-September of 2003.
What was the tone of this email?
Well, this email's message was that we were going to, as a company, we were going to restart any testing that we had previously done, restart the entire process, but this time the higher-ups like Gary and Mr. Danicourt would be directly involved with the proceedings.
Did you ever take part of that second wave of testing?
Yes, I did.
What procedure was taken during that second wave of testing?
So basically, every week we would get pulled into a room with the higher ups and they would talk to us about the certain procedures for that week. And sometimes they would say, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And they were just basically showing us the way we were going to do things.
How did they direct you in those staff meetings?
Well, myself, I felt kind of pressured to find certain results that they wanted, especially from Mr. Marone and Mr. Langley. They would constantly say, well, maybe we might want to do something toward this, or maybe we could try and aim toward this in some aspects. So,
Your Honor, objection. Hearsay.
Mr. Arlinghouse, response?
Your Honor, this is not hearsay under the exception of a statement of a party opponent. We have shown that Gary Langley and Alex Monroe are agents of the party opponent, and so therefore it's not hearsay.
On that basis, I will overrule the objection. Please pose your next question, Mr. Arlinghouse.
What were the results of that second wave of testing?
The results of the second wave of testing really just said that we're going to do more testing after that. The main thing is that from this new study, they found that a process of baking Drufo could kill any potential carcinogenic effects found inside of Drufo.
Did Lush bake their Drufo?
No, they did not.
Is it expensive to bake Drufo?
Yes.
I'd now like to ask about the end of your employment at Lush. Why did you stop working at Lush?
Well, a couple months prior to when I was fired, a lot of reports came about how I wasn't working hard enough. I wasn't doing my job. And I was generally trying out because Mr. Danacourt and I were good friends. And so I went to Mr. Danacourt about it because Gary Langley was complaining about me and I felt betrayed by him. He just shoved me away and I felt like the walls were crumbling around me. So I decided I got to be looking for a new job. And so that's when I found Terrace.
When did you go? Did you go to work at Terrace after the end of your employment?
Yes, about 6 months after I was fired in December of 2006, I started my work at Terrace.
Did Lush ever make a problem of that?
Yes. Apparently, I had signed a non-disclosure agreement. I don't remember signing this document, but the document essentially said that I could not work for any rival of Lush until 2 years after I would leave the employment of Lush. I don't remember signing it, and we went to we went to court about it, and it settled to where that time was shortened down to 6 months.
Did you follow that 6 months?
Yes, I did.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Mr. LaRue, you may begin your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Durst, while you were employed with Lush, you were tasked with researching the safety of Drufo, correct?
Yes, specifically nitrogen phosphorus carbonate.
And that assignment came from Lush itself?
Yes.
Meaning nobody was making Lush undertake that research. The company was making that decision on its own.
Objection, compound questioned.
Any response, Mr. LaRue?
I was not compounding a question. I was merely emphasizing the original statement.
I'll overrule it. Go ahead, Mr. Durst, if you would answer the question.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, sir. In fact, employment, a whole team of people was researched to the product to make sure it was not only safe for the environment, but for the public?
Yes.
Excellent. So nobody at Lush ever told you to hide your research, correct, Mr. Durst?
Wrong. Alex Monroe did tell us that we were going to keep the information inside of the walls of the company.
So you were good friends with the Danacourt family, correct?
Yes, yes. Charles and I have known each other forever.
Objection, relevance.
Mr. LaRue, any response?
The relationship with the Danacourt family is very pertinent with Mr. Durst receiving jobs and such.
Your Honor, permission to respond?
You may.
Your Honor, him receiving his job has no relevance in the matter of the case. It's simply just a fact that can be mentioned, and that his relationship with the Danacourts is also not relevant to that.
There's certainly some area of impeachment here that I'll allow
Your
overrule.
Honor, permission to respond? Sorry.
We're going to keep this moving. I'm going to overrule the objection. Go ahead, Mr. LaRue.
So you don't work at Lush anymore, do you, Mr. Durst?
No, I did not.
That's because you were fired after mounting complaints of your job performance, correct?
Yeah.
However, you were also under the scrutiny of the executive team at Lush Fertilizer, who confirmed mounting complaints, correct?
Yes.
And Blake agreed with the actions of your superiors, correct?
Yes, he did.
So you were struggling with someone who treated you like family, letting you go. Is that correct?
Yeah, I felt betrayed.
You felt your work performance was in order, correct?
Yeah, I was.
And you may have heard some difficulty with Blake on the phone.
Yes.
Did you mention that to one of your fellow employees?
Yes, probably.
And before you were fired for poor performance, you never alerted anybody to the corruption, possible corruption at Lush.
I brought it straight to the higher ups, Gary Langley. I brought it to them.
Or the risks of Drewville?
Yeah. I brought the lab report out and I brought it straight to them. And I said, this is wrong.
Mr. Durst, do you know what a non-compete agreement is?
Yes.
Do you realize that you signed a non-compete agreement with when you first started working at Lush Fertilizer, correct?
I didn't sign it, but I do admit that is my signature on the back of that document, but I did not sign that.
Your Honor, permission to direct Mr. Durst to Exhibit 5.
Go ahead.
Mr. Durst, is this an accurate copy of the non-compete agreement you signed?
Like I said, it's an accurate copy of the one we discussed in the court trial, but I did not sign it, but my signature is there.
So it really hasn't been altered in any way since you originally signed it?
Sure.
So, Your Honor, permission to enter Exhibit 5 into evidence?
Mr. Arlinghouse, any objection?
I know, Your Honor.
Exhibit 5 will be received.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Durst, can you please read Section 2 of the non-compete agreement?
Absolutely. Non-disclosure conveyance. The employee will not at any time or in any manner, either directly or indirectly, divulge, disclose, reveal, or communicate any trade secret belonging to Lush to any third party, including but not limited to any competitor of Lush.
Thank you, Mr. Durst. So after being removed from Lush Fertilizer, you felt that the best course of action was to gain employment at Terrace Greenery.
Yeah, that's what I was good at.
You realized you were getting hired to a close competitor of Lush Fertilizer.
Yes.
And your salary is greater at Terrace than Lush.
Yes.
And in the course of events, Terrace is releasing a similar product to Lush's patented product. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm directly involved.
Objection, relevance.
Mr. LaRue, any response to the objection?
The product being released shows, sorry, Honor, no objection.
I'll sustain the objection then. Go ahead and ask your next question, Mr. LaRue.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Any redirect, Mr. Arlinghouse?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Durst, could you explain to the jury the result of your legal battle?
Yes. So essentially from the beginning, we were pulled in to this legal battle by the head ups at Lush. And I decided to go against them. And we had fought about it outside of court. And we decided before we went into court, we were going to settle. And that settlement ended in 2 years being dropped down to 6 months.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Mr. LaRue, any limited recross examination based on that line of questioning?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Durst, for your testimony today. The plaintiffs may call their next witness.
The plaintiff calls Dr. Casey Rogers to the stand.
All right, Dr. Rogers, if you would please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead, Ms. Hoba.
Please state your name and spell your last for the court record. Casey Rogers, Rogers. What is your current job? Currently, I'm a professor in horticulture and entomology at the University of California, Berkeley. What degrees do you hold?
I hold a PhD in agriculture and entomology, in which I received from UC Berkeley, and I hold a Bachelor of Science in agriculture and chemistry, which I received from CSU.
I would ask that the opposing counsel and Dr. Rogers direct their attention to what has been previously marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 6. Dr. Rogers, do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Could you tell the jury what this is?
Yes, this is my curriculum vitae, which is basically just describing things like my research interests, some projects I work on, classes I taught, job experience, and education.
I move to have what has been previously marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 6 admitted into evidence.
Ms. Smith, any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 6 will be received.
I would now ask that opposing counsel and Dr. Rogers direct their attention to what has been previously marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 7. Dr. Rogers, do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
This is a copy of all my research publications.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of such a list?
Yes, it is.
I move to have what has been previously marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 7 admitted into evidence.
Ms. Smith,
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 7 will be received.
Are any of the articles listed related to Drufo and its harmful effects?
Yes, four of them specifically. If you direct your attention to the top two, the articles I published in 2013 and 2019 are about weed resistance to Drufo, and the last two I published in 2017 and 2019 are about human exposure to Drufo and Drufo's toxicity and carcinogenicity.
I apologize,
Thank you,
but I
Dr. Rogers.
could not understand any of that response. Is there a way that it could be clarified or repeated?
Yeah, Miss or Dr. Rogers, the last answer you gave was clear, and then you did something with the technology, or I'm not sure, something happened, and then it became hard for everyone to hear. There's a lot of reverberation. So I don't know if you can go back to what you were doing before and restate your previous answer.
Is there still lag speaking now?
That's better.
That's better? Okay. Can you repeat the question?
How are any of the articles listed related to Drufo and its harmful effects?
Yes, four of them specifically. The first two are about weed resistance to Drufo, and the last two about human exposure to Drufo and Drufo's toxicity and carcinogenicity.
I move that Dr. Casey Rogers be recognized as an expert in the fields of chemistry and toxicology, specifically the harmful effects of Drufo.
Ms. Smith,
Permission to voir dire the witness.
you may.
Dr. Rogers, you are employed as a professor of horticulture.
Yes, and entomology.
And thank you. And horticulture is the practice of garden cultivation and management.
Yes, it includes that.
And entomology is the study of insects.
Yes.
And your degree is in agriculture and chemistry.
Yes, it is, my PhD.
And agriculture is the study of plant cultivation.
Yes, but it's also the study of just general farming related.
Thank you. You are not a medical doctor, correct?
Not necessarily.
And your expertise lies generally in plants and bugs.
Yes, but also the effects of pesticides that have on these plants and bugs.
Thank you. Your Honor, I move that should Dr. Rogers be admitted as an expert, that her expertise be limited to the harmful effects of Drufo upon insects and plants only, not upon the humans.
Ms. Hobani, response to that.
Permission to confer with co-counsel.
You may.
The study of agriculture and the things involved with that study also relate to the effects of pesticides and other such things such as fertilizers on human beings as well, not necessarily only insects and plants.
Okay. For our purposes today, I understand the objection, and I think it's well taken, but I'm not going to so limit the doctor's testimony for the purposes today. I think there has been enough of a foundation laid to have the full designation of chemistry and toxicology expert designation apply. So go ahead and ask your next question, Ms. Hoba.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Rogers, you mentioned that you have written about the harmful effects of Drufo. Have you completed your own scientific study on that matter?
Yes, I have.
Could you describe the study?
Yeah, I would love to. I put together a study with 3 different groups of people, one of them being a control group, as all good studies need, one being a group that were occasionally exposed to Drufo, and the third being a group exposed to Drufo on an almost daily basis. And these groups consisted of farm laborers or landscapers.
How did you monitor these groups?
I monitored them for any traces of chemicals in their body, either absorbed by the skin or breathed into their respiratory system.
Did you also monitor their health?
Yes, we monitored them for any serious health conditions that showed up.
Were they compared to the control group?
Yes, they were.
So
What were
Dr. Rogers, we're having similar issues again with the reverberation. I don't know if you've changed something, if you can go
I'm
back.
sorry, I forgot to mute my microphone. And as a result, considering that we're in the same room, Dr. Rogers had some reverb in her audio.
All right, thank you.
I will be more careful in the future. Apologies. Dr. Rogers, what were the results of this study?
It was found that the group of people exposed to Drufo on a very daily or regular basis were 10 times more likely to develop cancer or very serious health conditions than the group that were not exposed, and 5 times more likely to develop health conditions than the group that were occasionally exposed.
Do these serious health conditions include non-Hodgkin lymphoma?
Yes,
Yes, they do.
Did you review Dakota Weir's medical and employment records for this trial?
Yes.
Yes, I have.
Is the level of exposure to Drufo of those in the group that was exposed to Drufo almost daily similar to that of Mr. Weir's?
Yes, from what
What I'm aware of, it was very similar.
How is non-Hodgkin lymphoma caused?
Non-Hodgkin lymphoma.
Objection, Your Honor. This witness is not a medical doctor. They do not have the scope of knowledge necessary to explain cancer specifically, especially in detail. That is the duty of a doctor. They are an expert in the harmful effects of pesticide, not the specifics of cancer.
Your Honor, permission to respond?
Go ahead.
This witness is an expert in the harmful effects of Drufo. This includes, these effects, according to her study, include non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and as a result, she would have studied non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and this is within the scope of her expertise.
I am going to overrule the objection for the purposes of this proceeding. Go ahead, Ms. Well, I think Dr. Rogers can answer.
What was the question again?
How is non-Hodgkin lymphoma caused?
Well, it can be caused by
mainly environmental conditions. So that includes if you breathe in toxins and it gets into your lungs and your respiratory system, or if these chemicals are absorbed by your skin.
Can non-Hodgkin lymphoma be cured?
No, unfortunately, because it is a type of cancer, it cannot be cured, but it can be treated with things like chemotherapy or radiotherapy.
Finally, Dr. Rogers, in your expert opinion, what is the probability that Mr. Weir's non-Hodgkin lymphoma was caused by his exposure to Drufo?
Well, in my expert opinion and from my years of research on this subject, I believe that it's very, very likely that Dakota Weirs developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma because of his link and his use of lush fertilizer.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Ms. Smith, any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Rogers, you researched Drufo's effects yourself,
Yes, I have.
and you organized and conducted the experiment yourself,
Yes, I did. I was curious.
and you did not have any partners.
No.
And the study was not peer-reviewed,
No, it was not.
nor has it been replicated.
I don't believe.
So you cannot tell the jury that this is reliable science.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's unreliable.
A yes or no will suffice. Thank you. So that was a yes.
I guess.
Objection. The witness has sworn to answer fully. If the full answer is neither yes nor no, then those two words will not suffice.
Your Honor.
Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
Your Honor, the question does have a simple yes or no. It is simply whether or not the jury can call it reliable science. Whether or not it is unreliable is an unrelated and entirely separate matter.
Ms. Hoba, you can re-raise any issues if you want this witness to expand on her testimony and redirect. So I'm going to overrule the objection. Ms. Smith, please pose your next question.
You also studied how to mitigate any effects of pesticides or fertilizers?
Yes.
And you recommend long sleeves and pants at all times?
Yes, I do.
As well as an N95 mask or respirator?
Yes.
And these are all steps that the user, as opposed to the manufacturer, would undertake, correct?
Yes.
You have never been qualified as an expert in a court of law before today.
No, this is my first time.
But you hope to more in the future?
Yes.
Especially in similar cases to this one?
Yeah.
That would be very helpful for your career.
I believe.
Objection, relevance.
I'm going to
Your Honor.
overrule the objection. Please answer the question, Ms. Rogers.
Would you mind repeating the question?
Not at all. And working as an expert in similar cases to this more in the future would be helpful for your career, correct?
I suppose it would, yeah.
And your career has been, in fact, focused on finding adverse effects to products overall.
Yes, in hopes to benefit the environment and just the community of people in general so they don't get hurt by chemicals.
And you've also made a decent amount of money off of this.
I guess.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Hoba, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Rogers, would you call your study unreliable?
No, I have
plenty of research, or I have plenty of experience in these fields, and I decided to do my own study to make sure that Drufo was not harmful for these people.
And you have written studies on similar subjects before and have experience in that field?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Ms. Smith, any limited recross based on that line of questioning?
No, Your Honor, nothing that has not already been asked and answered.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rogers, for your testimony. The plaintiffs, any additional witnesses from the plaintiffs?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. The defense may now present their case in chief. Ms. Smith, you may call your first witness.
The defense calls Blake Doncourt to the stand.
All right. If you would please raise your right hand, sir. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
Please state your full name, spelling the last for the record.
Blake Doncourt, Doncourt.
Do you know why you are in court today?
Weir's blaming Lush Fertilizer of putting unknown carcinogen in our product.
Is there any precedent for this accusation? I apologize. Could you answer the question again? I did not hear your response.
There is not.
Thank you. Has your company, Lush Incorporated, ever received any accolades or awards?
Award, and I was personally nominated for the Champions of the Earth.
Where do you get your information on your product safety, Mr. Doncourt?
Our extensive research, as well as the EPA.
Did you have any information proving Drufo to be carcinogenic when you began selling the product? Did you
Objection,
have...
witness unresponsive.
Your Honor, I apologize. That was simply technical difficulties. We are having some issues with the computers muting and unmuting at correct times, especially as we are in the same room.
Yeah, I didn't think this was an issue that was, I figured this was part of a technical issue. Ms. Smith, I think you'll have to ask the question again.
Of course. Did you have, Mr. Doncourt, any information about Drufo being carcinogenic when you began selling the product?
No.
Do you have any newer information proving Drufo to be carcinogenic?
No.
Had you received information about Drufo being carcinogenic, what would you have done?
Of course,
Objection,
I would have taken
speculation. Question calls for speculation.
Okay. Ms. Smith, any response to the speculation objection?
Your Honor, as I'm asking the witness what his actions would have been in a specific situation, I believe he has full knowledge of what he would do under such circumstances, as it is, of course, talking about his own person and his own actions.
Permission to respond?
You may.
Your Honor, the nature of this question calls for speculation. She is asking him to think about something that has not yet happened, and he has not yet done.
I'll overrule the objection. He can testify to his own, what he would have done in certain circumstances. Go ahead and answer, please, Mr. Doncourt.
I, of course, would have taken the product off the market and would have found a better product, a safer one.
Does your product come with any warning?
It does.
Your Honor, permission to direct yourself, the jury, and opposing counsel, as well as my witness, to what has been previously marked as, to Exhibit 1 in evidence.
Go ahead.
Mr. Doncourt, could you please read what it says under hazards?
Yes, it says to keep out of the reach of children. Caution causes eye irritation. Avoid contact with eyes, clothing.
Would you also read what it says under user safety recommendations?
It says, as with any spray fertilizer, utilize protective clothing that covers exposed skin. Use of a respirator or N95 face mask is recommended. Follow manufacturer's instructions for cleaning / maintaining personal protective equipment. And then users should wash hands before and after use of this product.
On the subject of baking Drufo, did you know that that was an option?
Costly, and due to the insignificant levels of toxicity, it's simply overkill.
Sorry, I'm going to need you to repeat your response. It was only half audible.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Were you aware that baking Drufo was an option you and your company could have taken?
I was, however, it was costly, and due to the insignificant levels of toxicity in the fertilizer, it was simply overkill.
Are there any laws or regulations motivating you to bake Drufo?
There was no reason.
Unfortunately, you will have to repeat the answer again. I apologize. Your computer did not pick up your voice again.
Federal or state law to do such.
I'm so sorry. A third time, the first part of your answer was, again, gone. I am.
I'll try again. Is it picking it up? Okay. There was no reason under federal or state law to bake it.
Do you know the opposing witness, Carson Durst?
I do.
And how do you know Mr. Durst?
He was a former employee at Lush.
And while working for your company, did he sign any contract relevant to this case?
He did. He signed a non-compete agreement.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Erlinghaus, any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. You're the CEO of Lush Fertilizer.
I am.
As the CEO, you're responsible for your company's success.
I am.
Your company's profits.
Yes.
So you'd say you're responsible for your company.
I am.
You're the head of your company.
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Your Honor, this specific question has not been asked, and I do have no knowledge of what the witness's answer may be. I have asked him his specific role, but not anything relating to what he does in that role.
Overruled. Go ahead, Mr. Downcourt.
Let me re-ask. You're the head of your company,
Yes.
but you don't do any research on your products. You don't do any of the research on your products.
Not personally.
Any of the testing?
Not personally.
Your employees do.
Yes,
And you're responsible for those employees.
I am.
You heard Mr. Durst's testimony earlier.
I did.
He never directly reported his research to you.
No.
His managers did.
No. I never received any information.
It was his manager's job to.
He could have talked to me personally.
That wasn't his job, though, as you just said and agreed to.
Well, it was his job to either report to me or his superiors any of the information he found.
You just claimed that he never personally reported his research to you, and you heard his testimony.
I did.
Okay. You're responsible for your employees?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered. He asked this a bit ago when he was asking about being the head of the company.
Yeah, no objection, Your Honor. My mistake.
Ask your next question, Mr. Erlinghaus.
You were responsible for Mr. Durst.
I suppose, yes.
And you're claiming he didn't do his job?
No.
Mr. Doncourt, do you remember writing a witness statement?
Yes,
And in this statement, you were being as accurate as possible.
yes,
And it includes all relevant facts.
it does.
And you knew you could update this witness statement at any time before trial.
Yes,
I ask that the court and opposing counsel direct their attention to what has previously been marked for identification purposes as Blake Doncourt's witness statement. Mr. Doncourt, could you direct your attention to page 29 of your witness statement? This is the beginning of your witness statement.
yes,
And at the top, that is your name on it.
it is.
If you would direct your attention to page 34. That's your signature there.
It is.
Thank you. I would now direct the court and you, Mr. Doncourt, to line 66 of 64 to 66 of your witness statement. If you would read along in your head and I would read out loud. If those claims are true, Carson had every opportunity to bring them to Lush's attention or mine personally while Carson was working for Lush's research and development team. In fact, that was Carson's job, to look for any dangers or risks that we could follow up on them. Carson accuses both Lush, that was all.
Objection, Your Honor. That was the answer that my witness gave to opposing counsel's question. I don't understand the need for impeachment when that is the answer that was given.
Your Honor, Mr. Doncourt gave the answer that no to me saying that he's claiming that I didn't do his job. In what the section that I read, Mr. Doncourt is implying that that was his job to do that, and he didn't do that.
I'll overrule the objection. I'll allow the scoring panel to determine what weight it wants to give to this issue. Go ahead, Mr. Arlinghouse.
You fired Mr. Durst. Mr. Doncourt.
Yes,
And at that time, you were going through tough times.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevant. I
Your
fail
Honor.
to see how Mr. Doncourt's personal life relates to possible negligence within the company or the carcinogenic properties of Drufo, as is the point of this.
Overruled. I think this goes to his credibility. Please continue, Mr. Arlinghouse.
Let me re-ask. And at that time, you were going through tough times.
yes,
A divorce
yes,
with your previous wife,
yes,
Morgan.
Objection, Your Honor. The details as to his wife's life are outside of the scope of his reliability as a witness, as
Permission
you
to
have
respond.
claimed is the point of this line of question.
Mr. Arlinghouse, your response?
I was not asking about anything in specific about Morgan, but rather that was his previous wife, which I believe he has the opinion and his ability to answer, and the results of the divorce within my line of questioning.
I'll allow this, although we're starting to get into some pretty tangential information. Go ahead, Mr. Arlinghouse.
You had to pay your ex some money,
yes,
and that upset you,
of course.
and you have plenty of money.
Yes, I suppose.
I'd like to take this from a different angle involving your product. You don't bake your Drufo.
No, I don't.
If you did bake it, it would remove any carcinogenic effect.
I suppose, though it's not necessary.
But you don't,
I do not.
because it's too expensive.
That's not the point of this. It's just insignificant. But yes, it is costly.
Mr. Doncourt, I asked for a yes or no. Because it's too expensive.
Yes,
And it would be absurd to say you would negligently cause harm to your fellow human beings.
Of course.
I'd like to take this from another angle. I ask that the court, opposing counsel, and you, Mr. Doncourt, direct your attention to Exhibit 8. Exhibit 8 is an amortization table. Mr. Doncourt.
Yes, it is.
That you created
I did.
for baking your Drufo
Yes.
from 2004.
Yes,
It is a true and accurate copy.
it is.
I move that Exhibit 8 be entered into evidence.
Ms. Smith,
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 8 will be received.
You saved money for not baking your Drufo.
I did.
You saved 6% profits for your first year,
Yes,
and you saved 2% each year after. 2 additional percent. 250,000 each year.
yes,
And you would say you consider yourself a steward of good environmental and safety practices?
I would.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Smith, any redirect?
Just briefly, Your Honor. Mr. Doncourt, you hired all of the research teams that investigated Drufo.
Leading objection, leading question.
Permission to respond, Your Honor?
You may.
I apologize. That was my bad. I will rephrase the question and say it again.
Go ahead.
Mr. Doncourt, did you hire anyone to research Drufo?
Yes,
And as the CEO, what did you do with these research?
may you rephrase the question?
I apologize. As the CEO, you could have easily not hired these researchers.
Yes,
No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Erlinghaus, any recross based on that limited line of questioning?
Yes, Your Honor. You chose to hire Mr. Durst?
I did.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Doncourt, for your testimony. The defense may call their next witness.
The defense calls Skylar Weir to the stand.
Ms. Weirs, if you would please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead, Mr. LaRue.
Please state your first and last name.
I'm Skylar Weirs, Weirs.
Ms. Weirs, why are you here today?
I'm here to defend the product Lush Fertilizers and its component Drufo, as well as the company Lush Incorporated, as they are being unfairly blamed by my brother that it caused their cancer.
And who is your sibling?
My sibling is Dakota Weirs.
And what is your profession?
I'm an investigative journalist for The Rationalist.
What is The Rationalist, Ms. Weirs?
The Rationalist is a quarterly scientific magazine published by the Rationalist Society, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes scientific skepticism as well as resisting the spread of pseudoscience and irrational beliefs.
And Ms. Weirs, are you motivated by money?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I really believe in this case. Lush Incorporated is donating 10% of their annual profits to help with nitrogen contamination. And their CEO actually started a charity to help clean up dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. If I'm being honest, I'm a freelance investigative journalist, which isn't exactly lucrative. So, I mean, I have a part-time job at Applebee's just to make ends meet.
Objection, narrative.
Mr. LaRue.
Your Honor, establishing that Miss Weirs works at Applebee's presents that this is not promote. Sorry, Your Honor. May I meet with co-counsel?
You may.
Your Honor, I was asking based off of her economic status and how that relates. You're muted, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. LaRue. I'm going to overrule the objection, but please do pose your next question, Mr. LaRue.
Ms. Weirs, can we address the background you have for the information on this case?
Yeah, I mean, I may not have a college degree, but I do have research that I've done specifically in agritech and DRUFO. My expertise, my knowledge base is in general knowledge as well as historical and statistical information, which doesn't require a college degree.
How long have you been researching DRUFO for the Rationalist?
I've been researching for the Rationalist. I've been researching for almost a year, specifically with DRUFO in that research.
And your opinion has no effect on the conclusions or facts you present from your research?
No, I mean, I have to present this information in a way that makes sense to the public and is, readable and understandable, but I don't present my own opinions in that research.
Your Honor, may I move to enter Skylar Weirs as an expert in investigative reporting, specifically in respect to DRUFO?
Ms. Sims, any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel has not shown that Skylar Weirs has the ability to form a proper opinion. They have not shown that Skylar Weirs has skills, training, nor reasonable experience. They have not shown that they have any knowledge beyond that of an average person. A Google search is not special knowledge. She doesn't have a degree.
Mr. LaRue, any response?
Your Honor, Ms. Weirs has spent over a year researching and specifically stated that it is not required to have a degree to understand what she is researching, and especially with the time that she's allowed for this.
All right, I think under Rule 702, this in other circumstances maybe would not have been enough, but for the purposes of this proceeding, I will recognize Ms. Weirs as an expert. Please ask your next question, Mr. LaRue.
So, Ms. Weirs, after this, your research, you wrote an article, correct?
Yes, I did.
Can you list the information found in your research?
Yeah, I found out that DRUFO is a bonding agent, so it bonds to the grass as well as to lush fertilizer to help prevent that nitrogen runoff. And I also found that a lot of, pesticides, a lot of pesticides have known carcinogens in them, as identified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Arsenic is a carcinogen and glyphosate is a possible.
Outside the scope of expertise.
I'm going to overrule the objection for the purposes of this proceeding. Ms. Weirs, please continue.
And glyphosate is a possible carcinogen. But DRUFO eliminates the need for these pesticides. Yeah.
So, Ms. Weirs, did you write this article to research the effects of your sibling?
No, coincidentally, I was doing this research before my sibling was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
And now that your sibling has been sort of conditioned to have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, does that affect how you testify?
I mean, no, this is a case that is more, we find that the facts are more valid than the sympathies that we all share for Dakota. It's really just a case based on facts. Obviously, I really care for my twin, but I hope that they find justice in other places, because right now we just have to focus on the facts.
Narrative.
Mr. LaRue, why don't you ask your next question?
Yes, Your Honor. What did you find out about the link between Drufo and certain types of cancers?
Based on the information that I found, there's really no evidence that Drufo has a causal link to cancer with any degree of certainty. And the pesticides are what is found to have a causal link with cancer.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Sims?
Ms. Weirs, you're related to Dakota Weirs?
Yes, I am.
You're twins?
Yes.
You have a difficult relationship with your brother.
I mean, it's definitely not your typical twin relationship, no.
Your father helps your brother?
Yes.
To pay his medical bills?
Yes.
Your brother who has cancer?
Yes.
So most of his money goes towards his treatment?
I mean, I assume a significant amount of his money.
And you're a gambler?
Yeah, you could say that I have a little bit of a gambling problem.
With significant debts?
I did kind of crawl into a hole that I've had a little bit of a hard time crawling back out of.
Now, you write for The Rationalist?
I do.
About scientific topics?
Yes, I do.
About UFOs?
I mean, I write about all kinds of different things for The Rationalist.
And flat Earth theory?
Again, I write for all kinds of different things.
And if it pays well, you'll write about anything?
I mean, this job isn't exactly lucrative, so it's not really about the money.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. LaRue, any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Oh, I was muted, sorry. Thank you, Ms. Weirs. The defense may call their next witness.
The defense calls Dr. Devin Williams to the stand.
Dr. Williams, if you'll raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will give before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Cameron, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Will you please state your full name and spell your last for the record?
Of course. Devin Williams, Williams.
Thank you. I'm so sorry, Your Honor. I'm having a bit of a technical difficulty. My apologies. Dr. Williams, why are you here today?
I'm here today because Lush Fertilizer has been accused of its products containing Drufo. I'm sorry, can you hear me? Okay. I'm here because Lush Fertilizer has been accused of its products containing Drufo contributing to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in one of the witnesses on the other. So sorry, I cannot remember the name. Dakota Weirs.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And would you briefly recount your history with Lush Fertilizer?
Of course. I was hired as
Objection
a
calls for
technician.
narrative response.
Sorry, Ms. Hobo, what's the objection?
Calls for a narrative response.
Mr. Cameron, any response to that?
Your Honor, I don't believe this calls for a narrative response. I'm simply asking what Dr. Williams' history with Lush Fertilizer is. It's not going to be a narrative because everything that she will say is going to be within the scope of the question.
Permission to respond.
Go ahead, Ms. Hobo.
A history is by nature a story, and a story is by nature a narrative. Therefore, that question calls for a narrative response.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Go ahead and answer, please.
Thank you. I was hired as a technician after at Lush Fertilizer, and then after about 3 years, I was promoted to lead the research and development labs, and I've been doing that for about 7 years. I also hold the chair on the ethics committee.
Thank you. So you have significant experience with DRUFO.
I do. I lead the
Objection,
research
leading
and development
question.
labs.
Mr. Cameron,
My apologies, Your Honor. That is my mistake. Allow me to rephrase the question.
go ahead.
Do you have significant experience with DRUFO, Dr. Williams?
I do.
And would you please give a brief explanation of your education?
Most definitely. Undergrad through PhD, I attended CSU down in Fort Collins. I studied toxicology. I also completed a post-PhD program at the University of Utah. I studied pharmacotoxicology there.
Thank you. Just briefly, what is your work experience?
I worked as an assistant professor at my time at CSU as a forensic toxicologist assistant professor. I also worked with the chief medical examiner of Larimer County analyzing toxins. Now I work in Lush Fertilizer leading their research and development labs in DRUFO specifically. On the side, I also teach forensic toxicology at CSU and the University of Albuquerque.
And just so the court can better understand your experience, what is toxicology?
Toxicology is the study of biochemical and biomolecular markers to ascertain whether something will be toxic to life forms, especially humans. I do.
Would you be able to
I'm sorry,
recognize
Your
a
Honor,
copy
I
of who
could
you're
not
directed
hear
to?
the question that Mr. Cameron asked.
I didn't either. Mr. Cameron, can you repeat that? All I heard was the answer, which is I do.
My apologies. Allow me to repeat the question. Dr. Williams, do you have a curriculum vitae? Was that audible?
Yes, it was. Thank you, sir.
Would you recognize a copy if you were directed to it?
Most definitely.
Your Honor, permission to direct the witness as well as the jury and opposing counsel to what has been previously marked as Exhibit 9.
You may.
Dr. Williams, would you please flip?
I have.
I'm sorry, you were muted.
My apologies. Dr. Williams, would you please flip to Exhibit 9?
I have.
Thank you. Is this a fair and accurate representation of your curriculum vitae?
Yes, it is.
Does it appear to be altered in any way?
Objection, witness non-responsive.
You were
I'm
muted.
so sorry. It does not.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, permission to submit what has previously been marked as Exhibit 9 into evidence?
Ms. Hoba,
No objection.
Exhibit 9 will be received.
Your Honor, I move that Dr. Devin Williams be entered as an expert witness in forensic and pharmacotoxicology.
Ms. Hoba,
No objection.
Dr. Williams will be recognized as an expert in those fields.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Williams, would you tell the jury how DRUFO works?
Absolutely. DRUFO is a binding agent that can interrupt the effects of eutrophication. It affects the water retention in soil, and then when it attaches to that soil and the plant, when irrigation runoff or rain comes, then the fertilizer stays in the plant and the excess nitrates don't go into the water. If they do go into the water with normal fertilizers and they reach just flat bodies of water, they can create really dense algae blooms, and they create very dangerous bacteria that kill fish and are also really harmful to humans. DRUFO helps make fertilizers much more environmentally safe.
Are you aware of whether DRUFO has been banned in any countries?
The opposing counsel says that it was banned in France, but this doesn't go quite far enough. It's banned in the whole EU. The UK did lab tests with the nitrates in DRUFO, and even though it reduces the runoff nitrates, it still contains nitrogen. So if you add the right bacteria, it'll behave the same way. Lush is planning to go to the UK and request it be allowed after further study.
Do you believe that this ban in the EU is reasonable?
I do not.
Are you aware of any links between DRUFO and non-Hodgkin lymphoma?
I am not.
Are you familiar with the study done by Dr. Casey Rogers in regards to the toxicity of DRUFO?
Generally, yes.
In your expert opinion, is this study reliable?
Not really. It hadn't been peer reviewed, and they kind of compared apples to oranges. They compared DRUFO fertilizers to other pesticides, and it contained way too many variables to be a legitimate study. The farmers in all of the groups were exposed to many chemicals, so DRUFO being there could be coincidental. DRUFO has hardly any legitimate correlation to cancer, and this study didn't prove very much.
And in your expert opinion, is there any relevant evidence that you have observed that DRUFO causes cancer in humans?
Nope.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Ms. Hoba, any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
You may proceed.
So, Dr. Williams, you work for Lush Fertilizer?
Yes, I do.
And you admit that you have a financial bias in this case as a result?
Well, only because I work there, yes.
Now, during your time at Lush, you worked on DRUFO's testing?
Yes, I lead the research and development labs for it.
But you joined Lush partway through DRUFO's development.
Yes, but I was added quickly to the labs.
So you were not part of the original development team?
I do not think so, no.
You eventually led the testing on DRUFO?
Yes, I currently do.
But you were not, but you mainly oversaw work on DRUFO's environmental impacts?
Yes, that's what our company is most concerned with.
So therefore you were not focused on DRUFO's health impacts?
Well, it's certainly part of it, but it wasn't the only focus.
Dr. Williams, if you were focused mainly on DRUFO's environmental impacts, does that mean that as a result, you were not mainly focused on its health impacts?
Yes.
And your goals as the head of the research and development team were to keep DRUFO industry leading?
Yes, that's what
and
most businesses
cost
do.
effective.
Yes.
Now switching gears, DRUFO is banned in the EU.
It is.
And Lush is planning on contesting this decision.
Yes.
But this lawsuit could change that.
Well, it wouldn't change any data, but it could create more problems in that, I suppose.
So that's a yes.
Yes, sorry.
On another note, Dr. Williams, do you think that DRUFO reduces pollution?
Of course, that's its main job.
And as a result, you think DRUFO is truly revolutionary?
Well, DRUFO started a revolution of fertilizer, yes.
You think that DRUFO couldn't possibly be linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma?
It's not statistically significant in the slightest, so no.
Which is, in your opinion, fortunate for the planet?
Of course.
And in your own words, for Lush and for its stockholders?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Can you redirect, Mr. Cameron?
Yes, just briefly, Your Honor. Dr. Williams, as an expert in pharmacotoxicology, you would be able to tell if something had any health benefits in humans, correct?
Most definitely.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Hobart, any limited recross?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Williams, for your testimony. We are now at the conclusion of the evidence, and so I'll invite the prosecution, or excuse me, the plaintiff, to present their closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I begin?
You may.
Lush's lies ruin lives. The case before you today is that of Dakota Weirs, a brilliant high school student with a shining talent for the piano who developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a painful and incurable form of cancer. This was because of Lush fertilizer and their product DRUFO, a chemical compound that brought financial benefits to Lush and cancer to Dakota Weirs. In order for you to find that Lush fertilizer was negligent, 4 things must have been proven, and 4 things have been proven. Number 1, Lush fertilizer manufactured a fertilizer containing DRUFO. Lush has not attempted to contest this. Number 2, Lush fertilizer failed to exercise reasonable precautions, and in doing so created the risk to Dakota Weirs' health. Lush would have you believe that DRUFO is harmless. To support this, they have presented the testimony of 3 witnesses. Number 1 is Blake Doncourt, the CEO of Lush, dependent on the success of DRUFO for her own profit, and utterly unqualified to talk about the toxicity of anything. Number 2 is Skylar Weirs, the Dakota Weirs' own twin, a conspiracy theorist with little to no research experience, no college degree, and a grudge against his brother for taking the money funding his gambling debt to instead pay for his cancer treatment. And finally, Dr. Devin Williams, a Lush employee who spent her time researching DRUFO, not looking at its health impacts, but rather its environmental impacts. By contrast, you have heard the testimony of Dr. Casey Rogers, an expert in chemistry and toxicology who has spent nearly a decade publishing studies about DRUFO. In her very own study, she discovered that DRUFO creates a 10-fold increase in serious health conditions, including non-Hodgkin lymphoma, in its users. She has testified that it is very likely that Dakota Weirs developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma due to his exposure to DRUFO. You've heard the testimony of Carson Durst, the lead product developer at a major fertilizer company, and a person who worked on the development of DRUFO. He has testified that Lush was aware of a study that found DRUFO to be carcinogenic in rats. He has testified that they attempted to find out if DRUFO was carcinogenic in humans. He has testified that they kept hidden some of their research, that it was understood what conclusions they would like to find. And he testified that in the final report, though baking DRUFO was suggested to remove any carcinogenic properties, Lush refused to do so. Blake Doncourt herself, the CEO, testified that this was financially motivated. Thus, it has been proven that Lush fertilizer failed to exercise reasonable precautions to prevent a risk they both knew about and knew how to prevent, simply for profit. Number 3, Dakota Weirs was a person who could have reasonably been expected to use Lush's products. Dakota Weirs worked for a landscaping company. Landscaping companies use fertilizer. Unfortunately for Mr. Weirs, this one happened to use Drufo-based products. And finally, number 4, Lush fertilizer damaged Dakota Weir's health while he was using that product in a manner which Lush could have reasonably expected. Dakota Weirs has non-Hodgkin lymphoma. He has a painful and incurable form of cancer, one that has been linked in Dr. Casey Rogers' study to the Drufo that is contained in Lush's fertilizer. That's damage. Dakota Weirs was using that fertilizer in a way that could have been reasonably expected, in shorts and a t-shirt, just like everyone else at the company. A reasonable thing to wear in the summer, especially considering the lack of warning on Lush's packaging. Number 4 has been proven. Each of these 4 statements have been proven. Lush fertilizer was negligent. That negligence gave cancer to Dakota Weirs. He is constantly in pain. His future was destroyed, and he is no longer able to do the one thing he loves, play the piano, simply because of that cancer. Lush's lies ruin lives. Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I may, remind the court that for any extra closing time, go to rebuttal.
That had been previously requested. Thank you for the reminder. I believe there's, I'll ask the timekeeper, it's between 10 and 15 seconds left for rebuttal.
10 seconds.
10 seconds.
Right.
I will invite the defense to present closing argument. Go ahead whenever you're ready, Ms. Smith.
Members of the jury, today we have been presented with a tragic case of misinformation. Dakota Weirs is going through a terribly difficult and painful event, but as jurors in this case, you must decide the verdict based on evidence and science, not the influence of sympathy. The plaintiff bears the burden of proof by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning they must prove that it is more likely than not that Lush was negligent and therefore liable. The plaintiff has failed to do so. Opposing counsel brought up the 4 things needed to be proven, set out in jury instruction 2, but they were incorrect in their assessment of what has been proven. The only one of these 4 objectives that has been proven so far is the first, that Lush Incorporated produced a fertilizer containing Drufo. And this did not need to be proven as it is a clear and obvious fact. As for the second stipulation, the defendant was negligent and failed to exercise reasonable care to prevent risks from hurting people. Lush fertilizer was researched extensively before it hit the market. Many people checked in on the effects and harm of this product, and no reasonable threat was found. For the third, the plaintiff was one of those persons the defendant should reasonably have expected to use the product. Dakota Weirs was a minor when he began using Lush Fertilizer's product, which is specifically labeled to keep out of reach of children. Therefore, he was not one of the people reasonably expected to be using a product for adults. Fourth, that the plaintiff's damages were caused by the defendant's negligence. The plaintiff, notwithstanding the fact that there is no proof of Drufo being carcinogenic in the least, did not take any proper safety precautions, those on the packaging or those spoken to them by their manager, both said to wear long sleeves and pants and a mask or respirator, as simple common sense as the most reasonable course of action, which Dakota Weirs failed to do. The plaintiff, has produced 3 witnesses to help strengthen their argument. Dakota Weirs himself, who connected Drufo to his condition through a Google search and failed to follow any safety procedures at all whatsoever when using multiple types of fertilizers, all of which are known to be mildly toxic. For the second, they produced Carson Durst, a failed Lush employee who left to get more money at a competing company, despite it being directly against the rules of his non-competition agreement. And thirdly, they produced Dr. Casey Rogers, who completed a study without having it peer-reviewed or replicated, which means it is in no way reliable or highly accepted science and proves nothing really of druthos carcinogenic properties. We have shown you through Blake Doncourt's testimony of his concerns for the environment and all of the extensive information that was buried to him through his employees that there is no proof found of drufo being carcinogenic. This is further backed by Skylar Weirs, who spent a year before this case even became a thing or their sibling was diagnosed, figuring out whether or not drufo had any causal link with cancer. And then finally, you have heard from Dr. Devin Williams, who has told you that despite her extensive and multi-layered research into drufo's environmental effects, which includes the health of those in the environment, there is no proof anywhere of drufo being carcinogenic. We are all sympathetic to Dakota Weirs' situation. However, we cannot allow sympathy to usurp science. And the scientific research conducted on the subject tells us that there is no reliable link between Lush Fertilizers products and Mr. Weirs' condition. The plaintiff bears the burden of proof, but the facts speak for themselves. There is no proof of drufo being carcinogenic, and no burdens were met accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. The plaintiff has 15 seconds in rebuttal if you'd like to use that.
Yes, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you heard the evidence. You heard the science as opposing counsel asked. Lush was negligent. Lush's lies ruin lives. Thank you.
All right. My understanding is that concludes the sequence of the mock trial here in round 2. Are there any issues that either party would like to raise at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense has 2 in-bar disputes to raise. The plaintiff.
Sorry, I just wanted to interrupt real quick. This is Stacey Arzeta, the coordinator. Since the trial has concluded, I am going to turn off the live stream now, and then you can proceed with your dispute.